I always imagined that the afternoon of my baby shower would shine like a soft focus photograph, warm cupcakes balanced on pastel plates, a ribbon of laughter twirling through the living room, the steady flutter of love that friends and relatives produce when they believe life is about to begin anew for weeks. I arranged things the way an amateur stage manager arranges a premiere. I ironed linen napkins, polished the ivory buttons on my maternity dress, and tested playlists until every note of Motown landed exactly where optimism could catch it on the eve of the party. I wandered from room to room, rehearsing how I would greet each person, how I would tilt my head in photos to keep the swelling in my ankles invisible, how I would sweep stray hair from my face without revealing that pregnancy hormones had turned my forehead into an alpine landscape. Daniel caught me mid-pose and asked half serious whether my jaw was stuck. I laughed, kicked him lightly with a slippered foot, and wondered if anticipation was a flavour. Stronger than caffeine sleep that night was a series of shallow pools, whenever I drifted deep enough to dream. My subconscious invented catastrophes. Helium balloons popped and frightened the neighbour's terrier. The lemon chest pie collapsed into soup. Or worse, I went into labour 2 weeks early, and the shower became a very different party. In one dream, Grace appeared wearing a crystal tiara, declaring that the hospital did not have lighting, flattering enough for family photos. I woke with a start, heart sprinting, and reminded myself that nightmares are merely stories without editors. The first cars rolled up around noon, engines ticking in the rippling heat of late August. My college roommate Madison surfaced from the passenger seat of a rented hatchback with a stack of diaper raffle tickets and jokes about how Parenthood was the only casino where the house always wins. Great. Aunt Bonnie delivered her legendary pie along with instructions about posture. Keep your shoulders back, sweetheart. A child feels the confidence in your spine. We laughed, hugged crinkled wrapping paper. Somewhere in the middle of that sparkle, I spotted my younger sister Grace, stepping out of a rideshare like the final model in a secret show. Nobody else knew was scheduled. Grace was stunning. Of course, that had been her assignment since birth. Cheekbones that could slice ribbon, almond eyes framed by lashes, falsely accused of being extensions, collarbones like ancient pottery sculpted to hold light. Yet her beauty, while mesmerizing, also felt like a thin lacquer over something brittle. We have never been sworn. Enemies, neither have we been close as kids. We played memory games at the kitchen table until she declared that matching pictures was boring and demanded real conversation. At 10, she told me I chewed too loudly at 12. She mocked the freckles on my shoulders. At 17, she left for a modelling contract in Los Angeles and never properly came home. Yet, blood is tricky glue. You think it has dried and then you find your fingers still stick. She hugged me with one arm, kissed the air beside my cheek and said, "You look radiant," in a tone someone might use to congratulate a stranger on parallel parking. I accepted the compliment as an act of charity and guided her toward the refreshments for nearly an hour. She behaved, sipping citrus sparkling water, showing perfect teeth in photographs, fielding questions about fashion weeks. I had only read about, but tension hummed behind her posture like an electric fence. And I kept catching her reflection in the window, studying the party as though it were a mirror designed to flatter no one. We were nibbling cucumber sandwiches when my cousin Lisa suggested a toast. Everyone circled the patio, and Daniel squeezed my hand. The calluses from rehabbing the nursery brushed my palm. Grounding me, Lisa talked about motherhood, about courage, about the strange poetry of sleepless nights. A hush spread, and for a moment I believed the afternoon would seal itself into the scrapbook, exactly as planned, each moment laminated by affection. That was when Grace cleared her throat. She sidled closer, raised her glass, and let a faint laugh slip out to my big sister Emily. She began, "Who proves every day that you don't have to be pretty to be loved? I mean, look at her. No offense, but genetics can be cruel. Let's pray the baby wins the lottery." Daniel clearly missed. Her words were high gloss delivered with the practiced neutrality of a runway stare, yet the barb landed and silence cracked in the air like ice splitting a pond. The oxygen vanished background noise. The sickers, the helium balloons tapping wood. The playlist, murmuring monotone, folded into a single ringing note. In my ears, faces froze. My mother's lipstick pink smile collapsed. Madison's mouth formed an O so perfect it could have been drawn with a compass. The insult itself was almost less painful than the physics of the room. Rearranging around it, everyone suddenly became either witness or accomplice, unsure where to anchor their eyes before I could craft a reply. A chair scraped. Daniel crossed the patio, calm as a storm, brewing miles offshore. He didn't raise his voice. He simply reached for Grace's wrist, just firmly enough that she would know he had her attention, and said, "Grace, if you're so beautiful, why hasn't any man in this world been wise enough to marry you?" The words were not loud. They were lethal, in precision sliding beneath her lacquered armour to the raw doubt beneath the room, inhaled and forgot how to exhale. Grace blinked twice. A porcelain doll whose string had been yanked unexpectedly, she tried to laugh it off. But laughter refused. Colour flooded her cheeks. Mascara seemed suddenly heavy. She jerked her hand free, muttered something about people being sensitive, and pivoted heels threatening the deck boards. The gate latch banged like punctuation. I expected to feel triumph. Instead, I felt winded, as though someone had slammed a door in a narrow hallway and compressed the air. Conversation resumed in hiccups. Daniel wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Are you okay?" he whispered. I nodded, because nodding is easier than forming sentences. Presents were opened. Knitted blankets, a penguin-shaped humidifier, books inscribed with motivational wisdom. Children cannot yet read. Laughter, returned, but thin, like a paper lantern flickering in a breeze. The buttercream frosting tasted of vanilla and guilt. That night, after the last car had rattled away, I sat in the nursery among half-assembled gadgets that looked like props from a moon landing. Moonlight poured through curtains I had hemmed at midnight. 3 days earlier, Daniel installed batteries in the white noise machine. "She deserved it," he said. I pressed a hand to my abdomen, where tiny limbs stirred, wondering whether my child had heard the ugliness echoing through my ribs. I also wondered about Grace alone in a ride-share wiping tears. Before the driver could notice the following morning, I brewed chamomile a peace offering to myself and dialed her number. She declined the call. I texted, "Can we talk?" She answered with a zip mouth emoji that felt more final than any sentence. Days stretched like bubblegum pulled too far. My parents urged me to let it go. Conflict during pregnancy, they argued, could sour the blood. Madison observed that some people enjoy chaos, the way others enjoy crossword puzzles. It provides structure disguised as challenge, yet peace refused to settle. The insult, echoed because every woman holds a catalogue of insecurities. Grace had simply riffled the pages in public on Thursday. I drove downtown to the boutique where she worked as a stylist between gigs. Racks of silk dresses swayed like tall grass in artificial wind. I found her adjusting a mannequin's collar, the gesture precise as if that plastic figure might judge her craftsmanship when she saw me. Her shoulders stiffened, but she did not run. I spoke first. "You hurt me," I said, "but I think you're hurting more." She scoffed, glossy lips tightening around unsaid defences. I continued, "I used to envy you. You walked into rooms and changed the temperature I never wanted. That power, just your approval." The confession startled us both. Grace bit her lip, a gesture I remembered from childhood when she measured the risk of telling the truth. "Do you know what it's like," she said, voice low, "to be praised only for a face you inherited? Every compliment is a rented dress you must return before it stains." Her eyes glimmered, and in that shimmer, I saw a child backstage terrified. The crowd would vanish if she missed a coup when you announced the pregnancy. Everyone looked at you like salvation. I felt empty. The mannequin tipped. I studied it. I'm terrified, I admitted. What if I fail at motherhood? What if the baby looks in my ordinary face and sees disappointment? My words left my mouth and trembled in the conditioned air, but the silence that followed felt less jagged. Grace exhaled. You think you're ordinary, you rebuild community theatres on Saturdays. You remember birthdays others forget, you listen until silence tells a story. That's all not ordinary. She shook her head. I wanted to puncture your confidence, because confidence looks permanent from the outside. Her hands twisted the price tag ribbon. I'm sorry. Apology was a door left ajar. I stepped through. Come to the house? Saturday, I said, help me test stroller folds. We'll order noodles. Laugh at the instruction manual, translations, binge reality TV until the bachelor picks the wrong girl. She laughed. Genuine, this time, and in the laughter, I recognized someone I might have befriended had we shared no DNA. I added, when you meet your niece or nephew, promise me you'll be the aunt who tells them beauty is something you practice, not something you possess. Saturday arrived in a rush of thunderclouds that refused to drop rain. Grace rang the bell, holding takeout, a toolbox insisting proper screwdrivers were non-negotiable, and a bouquet of sunflowers that looked comically large against her petite frame. Daniel raised an eyebrow, but offered iced tea in the nursery. We unfolded strollers, misread diagrams, and cheered when wheels clicked into place. At one point, Grace rested a palm on my belly and whispered, Hey, little one, I'm your cool aunt. The baby kicked, and she gasped, delighted eyes, bright with unfiltered wonder, weeks blurred into doctor appointments, llamas classes and midnight cravings for peaches no grocery store could supply. Grace attended an ultrasound, eyes widening at the flickering shadow that would soon be a person. She started texting me affirmations each morning, quirky memes each evening once she mailed me a robe she found in a vintage store, soft peach velvet with embroidered cranes. Wear it when the world feels sharp. The note read, I wore it often. Labour came in a flash flood, I remember, fluorescent corridors. Daniel's study breath counts, nurses whose names merged into white shapes. Just after 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, I heard a cry that sounded like the world beginning again. They placed my daughter on my chest. Her skin was the colour of sunrise through milk. I whispered, Welcome, Aria. And she opened one eye as if to appraise her new address before deciding it would do. Grace arrived the next afternoon carrying a scrapbook titled Beauty Lessons for Aria. She had painted the cover herself, watercolours blending like dawn across linen paper. Inside, she pasted photographs of women who changed laws, composed symphonies, mapped stars invisible to the naked eye beneath each image. She wrote a note. Courage rewrites symmetry, kindness edits the mirror. Curiosity bends light. She asked if she could read one aloud. And while she read, her voice trembled. Not with fear, but with reverence. Aria's fist closed around Grace's finger, and in that moment, I understood that forgiveness is not a ribbon tied, once it is fabric woven daily, adding threads even when your hands are tired. Grace looked up, and the apology in her eyes had sprouted roots, sending green shoots toward the light. Postpartum, weeks were a kaleidoscope of wonder and exhaustion. Sleep became a rumour. Diapers, a form of currency, showers a luxury negotiated like peace treaties. Yet every Thursday, Grace knocked on our door with coffee muffins and spare arms. She braided my hair while I nursed, told me stories from photo oots. Gone sideways, ignored, spit up on her silk blouses one evening. She confessed she had started therapy to untangle the metrics by which she had always measured her worth. She joked that vulnerability was scarier than runway heels, but she kept showing up one chilly evening in November. Daniel and I stood on the porch, watching leaves scuttle like rumours across the driveway. Grace pulled up in a borrowed pickup, hauling a rocking chair she found at an estate sale. We sanded and painted it together. Aria cooing nearby in a portable bassinet. Each brush stroke felt like a syllable of an apology being recited forward and backward until it became a hymn when the paint dried, hushed, seafoam, green. Grace sat in it first, rocking gently. Eyes closed, "This is what safe feels like," she murmured on Aria's first birthday. Guests gathered again in the backyard, lanterns replaced by pinwheels I watched. Grace kneeled beside the cake, smudging a frosting moustache on her lip to make Aria giggle. Daniel leaned in and murmured, "She's different." I nodded. Change is not always lightning. Sometimes it is the slow drifting of continents too vast to notice until the map no longer matches the shorelines. After candles were extinguished, Grace pulled me aside. "Remember what Daniel asked me?" she said, half smiling. Well, someone finally noticed. She held up her phone, displaying a florist named Marcus, whose smile looked like summer after a string of grey days. My heart lifted. "He thinks I'm beautiful," she said, because I laughed loudly, hold doors, and never let friends skip dessert. Then her expression softened, but more importantly, so do I. That night I rocked Aria beside the window, humming a lullaby whose words I had forgotten, but whose melody, my bones remembered the moon, settled on the crib rails like powdered sugar. I considered the chain of events an insult fired. A wrist gripped tears, silence, dialogue, labour, love growth. I kissed Aria's forehead and whispered that stories often bloom from broken seeds. I returned to the living room, where empty plates testified to another celebration survived. Daniel looped an arm around my waist. "You look radiant," he said, borrowing Grace's early word, yet filling it with sincerity. I pressed my cheek against his chest and listened to the drum of our merged lives, while Aria's soft snores drifted through the monitor somewhere on the coffee table. A Grace's scrapbook for Aria. I opened it at random. A quote in Grace's looping script read, "Beauty is the echo of kindness." I closed the book slowly, feeling the echo settle within me, certain my daughter would grow up hearing it, repeated not as a command, but as a simple truth already wrapped around her like light. The house hummed with the ordinary miracle of continuing the monitor, crackling, the dishwasher churning, Daniel's breathing a steady tide. And I saw clearly the insult at the baby shower had not been the end of the photograph. I tried to stage, it had been the flash that exposed every grain of the negative, revealing hidden shapes, waiting for gentler hands to develop them. Under that light, I discovered I was not only loved, but capable of multiplying. Love Grace was not only beautiful, but becoming whole, like a cracked face coaxed into art by golden seams outside. Frost spidered across the window. I traced a heart in the fogged glass and watched it fade. Tomorrow the cycle would resume feedings, errands, unexpected lessons. But tonight the story rested full-hearted and unrepeatable. Exactly the length it needed to be like a breath released after being held too long. Long before stretch marks and prenatal vitamins. Grace and I spent summers in our cul-de-sac, peeling stickers off popsicles and inventing talent shows for the neighbours. At 9, she balanced books on her head and strutted like queens she saw on televised pageants, while I operated the cardboard spotlight and shouted improvised jingles. One July, our mother entered us in the county fair's sibling showcase. Grace wore a lemon-yellow sundress and answered interview questions with unsettling poise. I performed a comedic monologue about runaway homework that left judges blinking. She won a ribbon. I earned a pen that leaked turquoise ink on the car ride home. Grace twirled her ribbon like a surrender flag, and I studied my stained fingers, unsure whether the colour felt like defeat or identity. At 13, our differences calcified. We roamed the mall, chasing artificial cool air, a group of boys near the arcade, rated girls on an invisible scoreboard. One glanced at me, shrugged and marked a dismissive 5 with his fingers. When Grace passed, he flashed a perfect 10 and blew a kiss. I pretended not to notice, but that night, I scrubbed my face until the mirror steamed. Grace barged in, asked why my eyes were red, and I lied that soap had splashed. She nodded, though we both recognised the mark of a story written in Salt Dan, and I met years later at a volunteer rebuild of the local community theatre, a red brick relic gutted by termites and budget cuts. I was painting set flats. He was rewiring the marquee arms dusted with sawdust. Like gold shimmer during a water break, he asked whether I preferred tragedies or comedies. Both, I said, because life never sticks to one genre. He smiled and offered iced tea from a dented thermos. By closing night, we were dating by the reopening gala he had memorised the names of the ushers back in the newborn era. Loneliness often arrived at 4 p.m, just as sunlight slanted through the blinds and revealed dust. I no longer had energy to chase one. Thursday, I texted Grace an SOS emoji. She showed up in 20 minutes. No makeup, hair in a knot, wearing a sweatshirt that read, "Your villain arc is overdue." She brewed cocoa, folded the avalanche of laundry, and listened while I cried about a diaper rash that felt like personal failure when Aria finally slept. We painted our nails a silent shade of defiance. Months later, Grace invited me to an open session at her therapy group, a family day designed to share journeys without violating confidentiality. We sat in a circle of folding chairs under fluorescent lights. Softer than expected, Grace spoke about mirrors as unreliable narrators, about how beauty could be weapon or bridge depending on who held it. She thanked me for teaching her that attention and love are separate currencies. I held tissues and learned that courage sometimes resembles a sister, admitting she is frightened of her own reflection. In early spring, a designer scheduled a hometown runway show and surprisingly asked Grace to close it. She insisted I sit front row. Backstage smelled of hairspray and nervous optimism between outfit changes. She tugged me aside and confessed that the oldest version of herself still feared I would fade in her shadow. I laughed and pointed at the audience where Daniel bounced Aria on his knee. "Your shadow," I said, "is shaped like a tree, now wide enough for both of us to rest beneath." She walked the runway with that image, like armour. She met Marcus 2 weeks after that show, when he delivered tulips for a photo shoot. According to her retelling, she panicked because he looked at her face last, not first. Their first date stretched 6 hours and ended with them repotting a half-dead fern she had forgotten to water. He didn't mind the wilting. She told me he cared that we could revive it. I suspected metaphors blossomed in that apartment, faster than the fern. By the following winter, they were engaged at the party. Grace asked me to give a speech. I recounted Daniel's quarantine-type question about her single status and confessed how it had cracked something open in all of us. Some cracks, I said, let the darken, but others let conversation in. Guests laughed, then dabbed tears. Grace hugged me so hard, the microphone squealed. Feedback looping into applause. Her wedding unfurled beneath autumn maple-stitched orange and scarlet. I stood beside her in matte olive satin, while Aria scattered petals with more zeal than accuracy. Grace's vows included a promise to measure herself. Not in reflections, but in ripples. Marcus vowed to remind her daily that radiance is not a contest, but a conversation between heartbeats. A year later with Aria, toddling and saying marvellously warped sentences, Grace called to announce a tremble in her voice that could only be pregnancy, she confessed. Terror, stretch marks, career, pauses, the realization that soon someone would watch her the way the world once watched her. Runway, I drove over with pickles and sparkling cider, repeating the posture advice. And Bonnie once gave me. We sat on her kitchen floor knees, touching, and designed a new scrapbook labelled Unfinished Masterpieces. We filled the first page with a mirror sticker and instructions to smile before turning the day Grace went into labour. I was in the middle of a rehearsal for a charity musical. Daniel rushed backstage, holding his phone like a compass. We sped to the hospital, singing show tunes to study nerves when her son arrived. Samuel, nicknamed Sam, The room erupted in joy, so bright it erased the memory of that first cruel toast. Grace and I locked eyes over the bassinet, each holding a baby, each holding an older promise. Now, fulfilled, no child under our watch would ever question their worth. Life continued, as it tends to, in the quiet drum of grocery lists, doctor appointments, and screen time negotiations. Yet every so often Grace and I text each other the same phrase at the same exact minute. How luminous it never needs context. It simply means we glimpsed ordinary beauty and wanted to preserve it. Sunlight on cereal milk, toddlers laughing at doors, Marcus singing off key while arranging pays tonight after cleaning icing from high chair crevices. I considered how that baby shower insult once threatened to reroute our future. I recognized that vulnerability, when met with gentle accountability, becomes a hinge on which relationships swing wider. I also realized that perfection, like runway makeup, melts under stage lights, but sincerity survives. Heat. Daniel entered the room carrying 2 mugs of chamomile and the look of a man who still can't believe his look. He toasted the quiet, I toasted the noisy journey that led us here. Arya stirred on the monitor, sighing a tiny exhale that reminded me people keep growing even in sleep. Outside, the moon hung in the sky like a round promise nobody could snatch away when I finally turned out the lamp. The house settled like a ship at anchor, creaking in language. Only timbers. No, I whispered. Good night to corridor photographs, wedding smiles, newborn yawns backstage, sawdust, and felt them answer with testimony. Beauty, I understood, is not a destination, but an echo travelling farther. Each time a heart chooses softness over spectacle, I let that echo deepen until it became